Ontario, and I'm in my basement in Peterborough, Ontario.
I love the lights.
Who's next?
Who's next?
Oh, Patricia.
Oh, she's muted.
Oh, I think Patricia's muted.
Unmute yourself. Unmute. It's from the top.
Okay. I mute. I will fix this.
We can hear
now?
you.
Yeah. Okay. I'm from Brazil. I'm professor. I work with educational technology, and I'm happy to be here and try to see if I can collaborate. So
Sure. That's great.
Okay, Michael.
Hi, Michael Berman. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for the Cal State System, and glad to join you today.
Oh, welcome.
I'm in Long Beach, California.
Nice.
I'm Laura, and then Joe.
Hi, Laura Killam. I'm full-time faculty at Cambrian College and moving into a position where we're going to be promoting innovation in our hub. I'm also one of BCampus Ontario's OE fellows, and I'm coming to you from the back room of the video production area at Cambrian.
Backlot.
That to me. I'm Joe Murphy. I'm the director of the Center for Innovative Pedagogy at Kenyon College in Gambier, Ohio.
And I'm Maha Bailey, coming to you from Cairo, Egypt. I'm the co-founder of Virtually Connecting, and my daughter is about to go to bed, so I just wanted to say hi, and I'll be gone in like 5 minutes without saying goodbye, okay? So listen.
Night night.
See you all.
And why don't you introduce yourselves from on site? Maybe Clint, if you can start, and then we can get a sense of who's in the room with you.
Sure. I'm Clint Lalonde. I'm the Manager of Educational Technology and Development for BCcampus, and I'm also Associate Faculty in the School of Learning and the School of Education in the Learning and Technology program at Royal Roads University.
I'm Amanda Coolidge. I'm Senior Manager of Open Education at BCcampus.
Teresa?
My name is Teresa Seldom, and I run the Teaching and Learning Center at a small rural college in interior British Columbia, Selkirk College, and I'm the past chair of the BC Teaching and Learning Council.
And I'm Maureen Weidman. I'm the Associate Vice President of Teaching and Learning at the University of the Fraser Valley, which is in Abbotsford, British Columbia. And I am also past chair of the BC Teaching and Learning Council.
We're just getting used to that.
Yes.
Because it was only past the reins yesterday. So.
Yeah.
So I'm Terry Bateman. I work on Vancouver Island at a small college with several satellite campuses. I'm the distributed learning facilitator there. It's a faculty position. And I'm the incoming chair for the EdTech users group. And I was co-chair of the organizing committee for this conference.
So on that note, can we hear how the conference has gone in terms of your perspectives? I know it was the first time that a number of different organizations have come together to create this conference experience.
Second time,
yeah. This is we do this every 2 years, and we have representatives of the 3 groups who have come together to put on this Festival of Learning. So normally every year in the spring, each of our individual groups put on either a scholarship of teaching and learning or educational technology user group or open textbook summit. And then this year, all 3 come together, and we try to do this every 2 years to get some synergy between the 3 groups and get the 3 groups collaborating and working together closer.
Mm-hmm. So this is the 2nd annual. And in the country, my own experience has been that there's has been more going on in teaching and learning in the East. So a lot of us had to trek east to go to a conference of this caliber. So it's been really refreshing to have something in the West, which is less expensive and takes less time. And it's been fresh and innovative. Yeah.
And what's also nice to see, I think, this year is we have quite a few international people here attending the conference. So I was talking to a woman from Australia. There's a few Americans here as well. So and from across Canada, they're coming in. So originally when we started designing this conference, It was really about promoting and supporting BC teaching and learning people, and now it's just growing. So it's a really good event.
Well, and because inclusion was a big part of this conference, we thought we can't say no. If someone wants to come from, we don't.
Yes.
We want to
Yes.
be open to the experiences of other people, other the
Yes.
province as well.
Yeah. So it's been great.
There's
Yeah, sorry.
So I was just going to say there's a few things that we've done differently for this conference that have really related to inclusion and access and equity, and that's we have childcare available on site. We also do morning yoga breaks. So we have a yoga instructor, and we also do morning walk breaks. So we have somebody who leads a morning walk, and those yoga breaks also happen throughout the day. We also included the pronoun ribbons on our badges that you can choose. And we also we developed a code of conduct for the event. And when we developed that, we wanted to make sure that we understood what it meant to have a code of conduct. So those of us as part of BCcampus took code of conduct training. So if there was someone who felt in violation of the code of conduct, then they could come speak to us and we could handle that appropriately.
Have you had anybody come forward? Not yet.
No, nothing yet.
And the food has been very, not a Danish in sight. I'm so happy. You get sort of carved out when you go to a conference and you're jittery. Like the food has been really good.
Great. Yeah.
Nice little snacks in between. Lots of
chia
fruit.
pudding yesterday, I had two, I have to admit. So. The other thing that I've noticed is that more than any conference I've been to, the inclusion agenda or inclusion has been really taken to a great level. It's just really beyond both the keynotes and the things that Amanda's talking about that we did in terms of policy and organization. But yeah, just everywhere you see the boundaries of inclusion being blurred some more. So that's been great.
It's fun to see the kids walking around in their Festival of Learning t-shirts. That's how we know they're ours. But
so they had kiddie yoga and stuff like that. It's good and good. I think one of the themes,
the tea room, and the gratitude. So the appreciation station. There's a little room out here that has teapots and a setup and little tables where you can have your tea, and the truffles that came from Selkirk, correct? And there's a little table there with thank you cards, and so you can write a thank you note to anyone, and they'll mail them from here for you.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've noticed as part of this conference, a theme that keeps coming up is this idea around empathy. And empathy seems to be underlining a lot of the presentations. And I know the conference theme was around really caring, but the empathy piece has been really strong. And so we had, I think there were at least 3 presentations on design thinking, of which empathy is a key part of the design thinking process. And then I know I've been to a couple of the sessions where that whole empathy piece was key and integral part to the design of the program that they were developing. So it was really nice to see sort of that a more student-centered approach, understanding the student, coming at it from a place of empathy, and then designing programming around that. So that was I think a great part of this conference.
Well, coming up with the conference theme, I was reading all these articles about student mental health, faculty burnout. We are all noticing that this was a big theme, but we didn't want to be too health specific because we wanted to make sure all of our communities have something to contribute. So that's why caring sort of became the key thing. And also BCcampus had kind of started with this yoga idea, and it all sort of seemed to come together.
And all the keynotes kind of plugged into that, but I would say I'm very biased, but Johnny Morris is a favorite person of mine. He came from the Healthy Campuses. He really got it going here in British Columbia. He now works for the ministry, but he came outside of the ministry, left the ministry for an afternoon to be with us, or a morning to be with us, and he led a student panel and got students sharing with us in such an intimate way. He has a real way about him that creates this intimacy, like he's having an intimate conversation with these 3 students.
In front of 400 people.
In front of 400 people. And then he did something even more magical, what he does is he then interviews people in decision-making positions about how did they hear what the students had to say. And then I hadn't seen him do this before, but he actually asked them for some kind of commitment based on what they've heard.
What can you do Tuesday?
What are you going to do Tuesday? And he also reached out to the audience and asked them for self-reflection, not for further questions, really carefully making the point that he wanted us to go inside also and think about what we were going to do with what we had heard. So that was very much.
Yeah, that was a great.
I think we had the students do a virtually connecting with us probably just after the panel, and that's what they remembered, that feeling of being included in the whole conference experience. And I think what you've done is really an explicit way of modeling what we want to do for our students within courses and learning spaces. So I think it's really nice that you had that kind of the feeling of inclusion with the conference.
Well, it's true, because that's what Stephen Brookfield does when he does the critical incident questionnaire. He asks teachers to do that in their classroom, and then he asks them to come back with what they heard and make a commitment to the students about the change they're going to make, right? So I think you're right that that's something we could actually model in the classroom. Good point.
Any questions?
Yeah. Any comments from you guys? Jump on into the conversation.
Crickets.
We're leaving room for silence.
Yeah.
We had some really great conversations last night about going gradeless. I don't know if any of you want to talk more about that, since we have a different group of people, and talking about the idea of feedback-focused assessment, and it kind of went along those same lines of empathy. I don't know if you want to comment.
I've just got back from Singapore, actually, and did a bunch of touring around some of the schools in Singapore. And there's NUS, which is the National University of Singapore, and Yale have come together, and they have a small university there in Singapore. I think there's 1,000 students, and they have no grades. And I'm going to say reject, which is a harsh word, but 93% of the students who try to get into this school that actually doesn't give any grades. So they have a high demand. And one of the things, though, that they focus on, because the students that they accept in their programming are really high achieving students who are not used to the whole idea of not having a grade or being assessed on that kind of level, is they spend the first semester and teach them how to fail. And how important failing is in the learning process, and how they make it intentional, that they're not actually failing, but that whole feeling of not being successful in your process, and then being able to evaluate that and go back and do something else. And that's where kind of the greater learning was happening. So they actually had to spend a certain amount of time teaching these high achieving students actually how to fail, which I thought was really interesting. And another thing that no grades offered, or what they found, was students taking courses they wouldn't normally take. So if they're really good in math and not so great in English, let's say, or writing an essay, you would have a tendency in university to try and stay away from those courses because your grades may not be as high. But when there's no grades, then they found that students were actually taking a whole wide variety of courses that they may not normally have taken. And it really opened up the possibility, and it really deepened their learning as they went through. So I thought it was a really interesting model. And I just loved hearing about this particular school. It was incredible.
And in our you probably know this, in the K-12 system in British Columbia, we're moving away from grades to just 2 sets of assessments in the high school years. And so it's too early to tell yet what that will lead to, but wouldn't that be cool if it led to more experimentation?
Yeah.
That would be very cool.
And our opening keynote, Jesse Stommel has written about not grading also in his work. And what I've been hearing, the keynotes have all kind of resonated throughout the whole conference. The things they've talked about have kind of woven into the sessions. And
I would love to see us go no grades for sure. Competency-based learning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Where did your discussion go with I think you're muted.
Yeah, it was the virtual connecting session that we did yesterday with Lisa Reed and Johanna. And yeah, because Lisa works in the K-12 system, and she was talking about this change coming to the BC curriculum, exactly what we were talking about, where they are moving away from a grades-based system, and how that is going to impact the learning experience or the expectations when
teaching
students
experience.
come into the post-secondary system. So they're coming out not getting graded, but now they're going into a situation where they are getting graded. So.
Well, I don't know about all my colleagues, but I probably could speak for Marie. I think we're all in teaching and learning very excited about this, what opportunities this provides for us.
Do you guys have people in place for that transition? Like, we've got a half-time position now, a faculty position that is going around to the K-12s, learning about what's happening to help inform what's going to happen at the college coming up.
It's off the side of my desk, and just another thing. But we're having a one day conference in October that brings together high school teachers and university professors and guidance counselors and advisors to talk about the changes that are coming in the K-12 system and how we prepare. And so there's a little bit of mistrust in post-secondary about this change in K-12. So they're moving away from content-based learning to concept-based learning. And of course, a lot of our faculty members are still, I got to get the content in, and so there's a little bit of mistrust there about, are these students actually going to be able to do it? So we'll see.
Although it is quite aligned with, which is helpful for me, supporting the work I've been doing on outcomes-based education, using rubrics and authentic assessments. And so really all of those things, if they've been participating, and some of our instructors have, about a third of them, I would say, then they're actually have a leg up for this change in the K-12 system, because they can respond better to the change, because they know about authentic assessment, they know about outcomes-based education, and those that don't are a bit more fearful about. And they keep saying, "Who's going to fix this for me? Who's going to put this back to the way it was?"
Yeah. So
I don't think we've had a similar movement or shift here in Ontario yet. I'm not sure, Joe, Michael, we've seen kind of threads of that happening in your areas.
I think it's fantastic. I'm not aware of anyone else in North America that's doing that. So hats off to BC.
Yeah, although we certainly do hear that post-secondary, surely someone will fix K-12 so that I can continue to teach the way I prefer. But yeah, we see largely the opposite. We see students who are perceived to be having trouble with some of the more analytical and creative thinking because they've come up through high stakes testings and heavy grading regimes. And actually we are looking at making some changes to particularly in our policies, particularly in our STEM divisions, but probably I believe they'll be successful and we'll roll them out further once we know we're doing the right thing. As you talk about, to look at the ways that a bad grade in intro chem says, well, you're not a chemist and you're not a pre-med and you just got to go pick something out. And there were some structural things, and honestly, I was very interested in your empathy and inclusion topic, because there are some things in environment that we can do to say, you belong and you can do this, and you're a high achiever who got here, but we can maybe if we
came out of the student panel.
Yeah, I was going to say my son's a medical student at the University of Calgary, and I mean, I know they're not perfect, but I really have seen some change there thanks to Nancy Chick. You should look her up, running the Teaching and Learning Center there, and all the people she works with. But they have taken grades away from, so once you're in, that's what they say to the student. They say, you got in, we know you can do this, so we're going to support you to do this. It is a pass fail, so it's not completely ungraded, but they don't get a grade, so they either pass or they fail, so that takes away the gradations of it. And if they fail, there are other opportunities to fix it. So, and then the amount of communication, volunteering, having to work with actors and actresses in simulations that they're having to do makes me really happy, because we have a lot of doctors who know a lot of things, but aren't able to help people make decisions about a happy life. You know?
That what you were speaking about, the empathy and inclusion, makes me think. This morning we had a keynote, Monique Grace Smith, who was fabulous. And one thing she said was that as educators, your job is to bring out the gifts of your students. And oftentimes I think when we're starting to speak about this grading, are you really bringing out a gift of somebody if they're so concerned about the anxiousness of the letter grade or the percentage that they're receiving? And maybe it's not, that particular subject area isn't something that would impassion them and bring them joy as they go forward. So,
and what you were saying about failure too, like teaching the students to fail, I think we need to teach the educators how to fail too. And that was a conference theme a couple of years ago now, where we just bring your failure stories, because we're all learning from what went wrong. Because you come with your shiny presentation, how awesome this was, but we know it wasn't probably your first try, right? Yeah, it was an ETUG. Yeah.
Speaking of trying something, I'm going to get Patricia to share what she talked about in the chat.
Okay.
See in the chat pop up, but I can't read.
Well, okay. I saw this project on Twitter, and I was very excited about BConnect, because we live in the south of Brazil, almost Argentina and Uruguay, so it's very far from São Paulo and Europe and things like that. So, and very expensive. And we have a problem here because our students, we are not very, how can I say, to understand English very well. I can't use a Hangout like this in my classes because my students will not understand, mostly. And I saw an opportunity to try to participate or to engage or to bring some conferences and try to use this kind of movement, can I say, it's a collaborative movement, to facilitate or to try something different. In August, well, in July, I will go to Los Angeles in a congress, Human Interaction, HCA, Human Computer Interaction Congress in Las Vegas. And I will present a session on learning and collaborative systems. Perhaps I can try to make some online session using this BConnect. And in August, we will have a conference in my university. It's I teach at the postgraduate program in cultural diversity and social inclusion. And it's a interesting conference, and we will have a main session with the Brazilian research, and she talks or she studies about communication and education and things like hypertext and well, I think should be an interesting way to introduce BConnect in Brazil and try to use this to try, well, to see if people can engage in this movement. And so
that's excellent. That sounds so good, Patricia. Yeah, building the opportunity to have conversations and just talk about ideas, I think, is really, really valuable for you if you are living and working in an area that that you need that engagement.
Okay, thank you.
Patricia, that's fantastic, and I want to mention also that we do virtually connecting sessions that are not primarily in English. So it's entirely possible to do one in Portuguese if there's an audience for it, or any other language. So we're very open and supportive of that as well, even though we are predominantly have English language sessions.
Okay.
And this is our first virtually connecting with Vancouver with the Festival of Learning. So it's pretty exciting. We're spreading a little bit farther and the conversations keep continuing.
Yes. I've always watched the virtually connecting on the fringes, and I know people involved, but it's really nice that it's here. I'm happy you set that up. Yeah.
And to have the students involved yesterday with right after their student panel was really interesting. And I think it's an opportunity for I asked them, how do they network for student empowerment outside of the Vancouver silos or outside of the Ontario silos? It was really nice to have that conversation with them.
Is it virtually?
So,
Virtually.
kind of going back on track, or back to what will be your big takeaway from the Festival of Learning that will inform or shape the next year or the next conference?
One of the things I'm going to take away and take to heart is something that Jesse closed his keynote with, which was trust your students, right? And that is sometimes it seems like it should be an obvious thing that when we're working with students, that we approach them with this sense of trust. We trust what you're saying. We trust what you're doing. We don't distrust that you're trying to cheat the system, or that, you know, the example that he used, the dead grandmother example, where you know, it blew out of. So it was a thread where someone wrote an article about, oh, my student used the dead grandmother excuse on Twitter, and it got retweeted and retweeted and retweeted and retweeted. And Jesse went, well, what if that student actually did have a dead grandmother, right? Like, or
even if they didn't, what's like something's happening, and grubbing? Don't treat your students with respect too. I think was a big part of it. Yeah.
So for me, that phrase really stuck with me at the end of the What about you guys?
Mine was, I think the overall, and this kind of sounds a little bit too generic, but the themes that I got out of the keynotes, all three keynotes, and then also the different conference sessions I went to, it kind of just relates to be a good human, like be a good person. And the way in which the keynotes approached the conversation, you know, like Johnny, his was a lot about like just this very active listening, and how did that all of a sudden change the shape of the room? And when you pay attention to somebody and you really listen to what the issue is, you know, like, to me, that was very powerful. And then today with Monique, and she really described, you know, the power of relationships and respecting people who've been ahead of you, your elders, in terms of what have they accomplished and how can you learn from them, and to give thanks, and this idea of appreciation and gratitude. And oftentimes, you know, and so I really felt, because this happens to me a lot, where somebody will say, oh, thank you for all the work you do. And I'm like, oh, no, don't worry about it, you know, and you kind of shy it away and you don't own it. You don't sort of take it into yourself and think, yeah, I'm so glad that I've done something that made a difference in the work that you're doing. So there was something, that overarching theme of just like, be a good human.
I think for me, like with today, I guess the whole idea of inclusion's been in my mind all week, because I know how careful BCcampus was with the food and with everything that was happening, that everyone felt included. And so I'm starting to think about inclusion and communities and networks. And we have our little communities that we get together. So having the 3 different communities here all together has been great, so we can peek into what each other are doing. But also, like, I worry about how our communities can sometimes turn into cliques, maybe. And so fostering that idea of inclusion, where you want to work together to learn from each other and the things that you know, but you also want to make sure that you're welcoming to people who are just coming into those communities and not being off-putting. So that's my takeaway this week.
One of the things that I'm definitely going to take away is the idea of student partnerships. So we always talk about student involvement, and we have a representative on practically every committee, might even be 2 students on every committee. Their actual involvement is not that high. And moving that idea of student involvement to a partnership, I think, is pretty powerful. And I'll give you one example. So just a couple of weeks before I came to the conference, I had a visit from our student union president, who said, we want to improve the quality of teaching at this university. What can we as students do? Wow. So it was like, wow, this is my opportunity to partner and all the work that we do in a teaching and learning center and with all the staff and the programming that we do, we only are ever getting to the people who actually are interested in those topics or looking to improve. The people who just go in and teach their course and then get in their car and drive home at the end of the day, those are the ones who we miss. And with the student involvement, the student partnership with the Teaching and Learning Center, I think we have much more opportunity to reach out beyond our sort of standard audience, the same people we see all the time, and maybe be able to touch now some of these others that might need some help. So I'm looking forward to that.
So I'm leaving in a few weeks for a 1-year assisted leave. And I had been thinking before I came to the conference that was a break from what I do in teaching and learning. But today I was really thinking about how connected it was. My research question is, what is the advice of wise adults? And how do those that they're advising hear that advice? What do they hear when they hear the advice? And I can see more and more how that intergenerational classroom is so important. And there were lots of reminders about that. So I think I can tie it back in.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Well, that's a takeaway for me.
I think that notion of intergenerational classrooms is an interesting one, and how we can bring community into the learning spaces. I think one of the student panelists talked about that at UBC, and how they felt included because there were other community organizations and agencies within the environment.
If I can ask, I would love to hear more about the student role, student partnerships in teaching and learning centers. Because while I think I've had some very successful stories in student employment, they're still basically student employment. You know, we hired the students, we gave them neat, challenging topics, and they succeeded at them. But when you talk about using the students as a conduit to different faculty, I'd love to hear more about that, because I'd love to learn from it and take it.
So I'm going to have to get back to you on that, because we've started the conversation. So one of the first things the student union asked was, we want to learn about the theories around teaching and learning, what makes good group work. So one of the complaints they have, of course, is they hate group work and teachers aren't very good at it. So there were a couple of key issues that they, as students, were coming forward and saying, we need to help. How can we get more help to our faculty members to learn more about group work? So it's partnering with the students around designing some materials and some workshops and some having these conversations. I find some of the best learning that we have with faculty happens when I have 10 minutes in a faculty council meeting, right? So I've got a group of people who can't leave. And it doesn't mean that they're actually listening, but at least they're there. So, and what I can do in 10 minutes can make an impact, and then I'm gone. So it's starting these kinds of inroads, I think, but bringing the student partner with me when I go in and have these discussions and conversations. So it's a start.
I actually have a project for when I get back from my leave, which I'm going to try. I got this idea from the ISOTL conference in Calgary this last fall, so the International Scholarship of Teaching and Learning Conference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer a 3-credit course for students in teaching and learning that has innovative best practices. And part of their project work and their assessment is to actually work with their teachers to implement one of these ideas in their classroom. Because I came back and I was like, I'm hitting my head on the wall with those teachers that just won't participate. So what if they kind of get dragged in kicking and screaming from their students who are going into their classrooms and saying, I have a project, I need to collaborate with you on this. So we'll see. That could fail miserably, talk about failures, but I'm going to try it. So it'll be a first-year credit course on teaching and learning that they could use as an elective.
I remember the group assignments I was handed in my master's program. Okay, you're a group, write a 1,200-word essay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I think sometimes we can, you know, we don't have to keep banging our heads on the wall. We can actually work with the students, like the student that's come to see Maureen, and just say, you're interested in this change. Well, let's make you part of the change. Then.
Yeah.
Why does it have to come through your instructors?
That's
if
right.
you're really interested in, and I've had students too talk to me about this. Wow, I'd really like to change the practice in my classroom. Well, okay, great. Let's work with you then.
I mean, and we all know that students have a lot of power. They're just not quite sure how to wield it. And I use the example of Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. Their teaching and learning center was actually started by their student union.
Wow.
And this was, I don't know, 30 years ago or more. So
cool.
Yeah, so it was sending a very strong message.
Hey, Terry, I don't want to put you on the spot here, or Helen, maybe you can talk about this, but maybe, I know it's not exactly part of your portfolio, but the SXD work, the Student Experience Design Labs that are happening in Ontario, are you guys comfortable talking about that? Because I think that's a really interesting way to involve students in solving some of the education issues they're facing.
If you see Chris Fernland walking by, grab him, but because he's there. And I just put the link into the chat there a minute ago. Okay. But so there are 5 projects where it's not just a partnership with students, it's basically completely handing the reins over. We led them, I didn't do it at all, but they were led through a design thinking process to come up with a problem first, not just solutions looking for problems. And so there were 5 different projects. They're all there on the site. Some of them are actually going to move forward into actually prototyping. I could quickly look at the projects themselves.
Will we get a copy of the chat?
Yeah, there's a copy.
It's in the chat. But if you can't get it, it's SXD Lab is the Twitter handle, I think.
Do a Google search for SXD Lab.
Yeah,
it's an eCampus on SXD, Student Experience Design Lab.
Okay.
And like one of them was about co-creating virtual reality content by the students for each other. One's called Free the Learning. One's like, it's all, I think the one called My Meaningful Life is kind of about taking control of your pathway through education. There's some pretty cool things, and they're all completely by the students for the students. So if you get a chance to look at that.
Yeah.
I think the interesting connection will be, how do they roll out into action in a higher ed faculty space? And
they will need, the students will need the support, and they will need, people who are going to stand behind.
Yeah.
And maintain their safety.
Yeah.
It's going to be an important role to play.
Well, I'm very aware of the time that you've taken out of the conference to spend some time talking to us. If you feel that you have to go, or you have one final thing you'd like to share about the conference experience before you head off, that would be great.
I'm hearing lots of great feedback. Someone told one of our ETUG organizers yesterday that she had taken advantage of everything, the guided walks, the yoga, just all of the things, and just was loving it. So makes me feel good.
People are giving out lots of really nice socks too, I see.
Yeah, I've seen the eCampus Ontario socks. I've seen the BCcampus socks. I've seen the Campus Manitoba ones. It's like,
I need to get some socks.
Oh yeah, there you go.
It's a sock-based economy.
We have Festival of Learning socks for the yoga room.
Yes. That's our currency.
I just won a book, but I haven't won any socks yet.
Forget Bitcoin.
We thought it was stickers and attendance, but it was all about the socks.
Socks.
Yeah. Who do I talk to?
Internet of socks.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to stop the broadcast, and we can continue having a little bit of a chat afterwards. So thanks a lot, guys, from Vancouver and all the virtual guests.